Hey, it's Drybear. Another week has come and went, so it's time to check in on our Dragonflight tank rankings. We'll take a look at all 6 tanks and how they stack up against each other in PvE in all categories of content, and we'll compare it to last week as well to see how those numbers are changing. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. All right, so we'll start by looking at last week's rankings. Again, the same thing with healers and tanks are notoriously difficult to rank. And I would argue that tanks by far are the hardest thing to rank, because the thing that you look for most out of a tank is, hey, can you get aggro and not die? And not dying is a hard thing to measure, but we do our best, and this is kind of an estimation here. So for raiding, I've looked at speed and score just to see kind of which tanks are present in the best possible scenarios and how well are they scoring relative to other tanks. It doesn't mean that you can't, it doesn't mean that like a tank that's at the bottom won't be able to clear all content or even push to the highest level, even if they have a lower score, because you can have a good player that just, again, as long as they don't die, or you can have good healers that prevent them from dying, or you could have DPS that don't mess with mechanic. There's all these different things that go into it. So this is week 4 as an estimation on where the tanks were. This is last week. One thing that should be noted as we go into this week for week 5 is that Vengeance Demon Hunters got a passive defensive buff, a class tuning for them. So they got a little bit tankier by default. It didn't really affect their output in any way, but it gave them a little bit more armor, and it kind of just helped to make them a little bit tankier. So this is week 4. Let's look at how this has changed going into week 5. And bam, we're into week 5. This is kind of interesting because just like with the healers, with Preservation Evoker and Restoration Druid fighting for first place, we're seeing Blood DK and Protection Warrior fighting for first place. And Protection Warrior has been the best tank in most measures ever since the start of Dragonflight, not even season 1. But Blood DK has been slowly nipping at their ankles, getting closer and closer to taking that first place slot. And you can see that this week in Mythic Raid, Blood DKs did outperform Protection Warriors, but then across the board, we had Protection take out overall in Heroic Raid and in Mythic Plus. We also saw Protection Warriors just do better in Heroic Raid this week. Again, I like including Heroic Raid as an option because it shows that when you have variable group sizes and generally the mechanics and the difficulty isn't enough where it can restrict how you play or how well you perform, unlike Mythic Raid with a fixed group size, and the difficulty usually limits your output in many ways. Heroic Raid is kind of like, hey, the training weights are off, do whatever you want. So Protection Warrior jumped up a good bit there. And we actually did see Vengeance Demon Hunter perform noticeably better in Mythic Plus and in Raid after the tankiness update, which is kind of cool. Keep in mind that Mythic Plus is going to change more drastically than Raid because every week we get new affixes, and it alternates between Tyrannical, which is boss focused, and Fortified, which is ad focused. So one thing to note about week 5 is that Protection Paladin shot up a bunch in Mythic Plus this week. And that's primarily because it is Fortified and Grievous and Spiteful. Grievous is anytime someone drops below 90% health, they get a ticking dot on them that puts pressure on the healer. Protection Paladins, unlike almost all of the healers, I mean, other than maybe Guardian Druid with After the Wildfire, Protection Paladins can Word of Glory people to top them to remove the Grievous effect. They can also bop, and they can provide a lot of benefit, so they can push higher keys than normal because this week kind of benefits Protection Paladin and how well they do. So that they got a nice little bump there. But looking at the overall numbers, they didn't change too drastically. Blood DK and Protection Warrior fighting for that first spot. Protection Warrior winning out overall. We haven't really seen any major nerfs that would change that. We're seeing that Protection Warrior is kind of sitting about where they've always been. But as gear gets better, Blood DKs are starting to climb. I think part of that because Blood DKs are the kings and queens of healing throughput. They heal more than any other tank, even including the Guardian After the Wildfire procs. And so generally their gear matters a lot because they can't flat damage reduction as much as other tanks, which means that they're liable to die with big hits coming in. But the higher their stamina gets, the higher their natural armor gets, the higher their strength gets, the more they can survive those hits. And then if they can survive those hits and those big damage windows, then they can instantly heal themselves to full right after, right? So gear benefits them a good bit, and we're seeing that in the numbers because they're starting to scale better and better. Whereas, you know, Protection Warrior has a wider kit of damage reduction and absorbs that can help them in many situations. They have spell reflect, and they have the spell blocking as well. So they have a lot of tools that just make them a king and queen for things right now. But we did see Vengeance jump up a little bit. Protection Paladin and Guardian Druid were fighting for the bottom spot. Protection Paladin, again, doing better in Mythic Plus this week just because of the affixes. But in Raid, they do struggle to kind of keep up with everybody else. We are seeing Protection Paladin actually being the lowest in Mythic Raid. So it just comes down to being able to survive. I mean, even with Guardian of the Ancient Kings, and they have like all these extra cooldowns, and they have like self bubbles and things like that. It just isn't enough for them to stand up, and they're actually being outperformed by Guardian Druids, which overall I think are the lowest performers in the game right now. Protection Paladins do even lower than them, noticeably lower than them in Mythic Raid. They do okay in Heroic Raid. The damage isn't as heavy, and there's definitely some opportunities for them to excel, but they are basically their best content is Mythic Plus. We'll see how that changes going into next week's affixes with Tyrannical, but this week they perform exceptionally well, and they also help their healer out on a heal-heavy pain week. That's pretty rough as well. Vengeance Demon Hunter doing great in Mythic Plus, as always. They have AoE Silence Sigils, which can help pull scary mob packs in all the dungeons. There's so many caster packs in this season. Temple of Jade Serpent, things like that just really make it tough for some tanks to survive, but that AoE Silence is amazingly good. They have an AoE stun as well. Brewmaster overall doing great, and I think Brewmaster, just like Blood DK, is going to keep climbing. They're also another tank that does exceptionally well with gear because it allows them to stagger more, allows them to dodge more. They get more crit stacks, and they can get more celestial effectiveness, which is really nice. And then their absorb shields get bigger and bigger. I've been loving my Brewmaster quite a lot. I always have a soft spot for Brewmaster when it comes to tanks. And then, yeah, then Guardian kind of down there towards the bottom. I think they do excellent damage. They just have a hard time keeping up. And this could be because of the Iron Fur windows are really small. It could be that they rely a lot on self-healing, but they don't have as much. I mean, they still have decent damage reduction. If you get all the Berserk stacks and all the Berserk talents, and then you get Incarnation, they can be really strong during that window. You have the Ursox procs. They have a lot of tools. I guess maybe they just need something, because they're dying a little bit too much relative to other tanks. They do fine in Heroic Raid. I mean, look at the Heroic Raid numbers. I would say you can bring any tank confidently. And then going into Mythic Raid, you might want to wonder whether you want to get Vengeance, Guardian, or Protection Paladin. I would say most of what's holding Vengeance back in Mythic Raid is probably just they need more gear. Higher eye level is going to help a lot. Or maybe, I mean, we'll see what happens when we get different sets with a new raid. Maybe the set bonuses just don't favor them that much coming into this. Or maybe they don't. I don't know. I think Guardian Druid gets a lot of rage, and they both. I think both their 2 and 4 set are related to gore. So, you know, maybe that's just not enough for them, or maybe there's not enough value coming out of after the wildfire when you spend rage. I don't know. Let me know what you think down below. But that's where we're at with tanks this week in week 5. The Vengeance DH buff wasn't really that big, but it did look like it had some meaningful impact. Like it did help them a little bit, which is nice. Protection Warrior and Blood DK are still masters of the universe. And then, you know, Vengeance Brewmaster do okay. And then Guardian and Protection Paladin in most content struggles. Guardian Druid, I would say, is easily the lowest performer of the tanks in the game as of week 5. So let me know what you think about this down below, how the stats came out this week, if this matches what your experience is, or if you've seen some amazing plays from some insane gamers playing these specs. And what changes would you like to see going into the game? Do you think, should we bring up the bottom line to match more Blood DK Protection Warrior? Should we wait to see what 10.05 does? What do you think 10.0.5 is going to do for the Warrior situation and for all the tanks that are in the game now? Or do you think that this is actually a pretty good layout for where tanks should be in general? And if there are changes, what do you think they should be? So that's all I got for you today. It's week 5 tank rankings. If you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.